I was born in Belgium, Western Europe, in the French-speaking part, in 1925. I'll be 91 in a few days. I was born in February. And I grew up in the Roman Catholic tradition. My parents were not very strict, but it was the Catholic tradition that prevailed at home. My father was the manager of one of the largest textile factories in Belgium. In one area he had 600 people working with him, and Belgium is well known for the quality of the textiles there. And my mother came from a family of people who had been working for the railroad in those days. He was one of their employees there. My father was a very well-organized man. I would not say strict, but yes, demanding. He did not show emotion very much. For him, emotion was something dangerous. He told us that several times. My mother was a beautiful lady, and she was 7 years younger than my father, and she loved life. She was a passionate woman, and she loved society. She was very proud of being Mrs. Dederen in town, because not everybody, but many people knew Joseph Dederen with his responsibilities. I had a brother born 1 year after myself, and a sister born 1 year later after my brother Alain. They both at one point were interested, especially my brother, with me in Adventism, but they didn't call on. Alain liked his extracurricular activities too much, and his tobacco in particular. He died in very painful conditions due precisely to the ravages of alcohol and tobacco, and my sister to some extent too a few years ago, maybe 10 and 15 years ago now. The emphasis in our family was always proper behavior and well educated. I was very fortunate after my first 6 years in public school to take a test at the age of 12 to join the most selected academic training, which was a national system run from Brussels, not based on the provinces like in the States, you know, U of M, University of Michigan. But we applied either hundreds, and usually 10% only, or 5% were accepted. And I moved into that school when I was 12. My brother came 1 year later. He also succeeded. It was quite the result of the hard work of my parents. I have always considered that the greatest inheritance that I received from my parents was precisely the insistence on classical education, because the area in which I went was the more difficult one, was not modern, and it was called, or technological, but it was in Greek and Latin. So from 12 to 18, 6 years, I had 6 years of Greek and 6 years of Latin every day, about 50 minutes, except of course on Sunday. And I was preparing for an entirely different career than what happened in my life. Usually you got into special medicine or the diplomatic corps when you got that particular training. In my particular group, there were 60 when we started the first year, and 19 left after the crucial 6 years, you know. So we were quite selected. I was quite proud, I must say, of wearing my little cap, which was a very particular cap, and which indicated on it in which year I was. No problem with the girls at all. On the contrary, I was a good-looking fellow at the time. And, well, I grew up not particularly religious, but sufficiently to... Religion was part of our lives. We prayed before meal, we prayed after meal, we prayed on special occasions. My father on Sunday afternoon liked, when we were younger, to take a book in which there were illustrations of Bible stories. Was not Adventist. And then in 1942, I was 17, in February of 1942. I was with my sister and tobogganing in the hills behind our place, about a couple of miles away. It was a long sled, about for 5 people, and we were going down and up, you know. We had a very good sled there. And I had noticed at the bottom of the hill a group of kids that my sister greeted, and I recognized 1 or 2 that I had met, which came from the next village, to which now we do belong geographically. I mean, you know, and so I told them at the bottom, now, you are getting cold there standing there, and your little sled, I mean, you seem to be disappointed. Why don't you come with us? You know, you'll pull the sled with us, it's a 5 people one, and we'll go fast down. They were Seventh-day Adventists, 2 girls, 2 cousins. I was 17, they were in their 16. And one of them was Louise, who would become my wife. And interestingly enough, they shared their faith. But I could give you probably an hour time to find the topic you would not. Because I don't think that you would think of the millennium as a way of attracting the attention of a young Athenaean, you know. The millennium. But remember, in 1942, we were under German occupation. And Adolf Hitler had promised a 1,000-year German Reich, German Empire, over Western Europe. So the millennium was a very social and political issue that we discussed quite frequently, but they approached it from the Revelation 20 perspective, because these 2 girls were not particularly interested in politics and things of that kind. And they intrigued me. Especially, I thought I knew something of the Bible, but I was ignorant, you know. And I couldn't believe it. We met again the next Sunday. 3 Sundays in a row we met with the sled, you know. And I was intrigued by these 2 girls, really intrigued. I mean, they had a way of talking about Jesus Christ that was absolutely foreign to my context. Louise in particular talked about Christ as if she had met him in the morning, and we are talking about how things were going with Jesus Christ. And you know, I had to go through the saints to get access to, preferably through Mary, to get access to Jesus Christ. But it was very attractive. And then they were very wise, or maybe unwise, I don't know. Because they did not put me in the hands of a pastor. I never received a Bible study from a pastor. They realized that it was not the good approach in my case. They were smart, these 2 girls. And they put me in the hands of a layman who was 10 years older than I was and who lived about, I would say, half a mile from my place, whom I knew, because I had met him on the street, you know, and I knew him. Not particularly, but I knew he was an Adventist, but I never thought that was different. And of course, very early I learned from Louise and Jeanne that they were Adventists. They did not hide their colors at all. So they put me in the hands of that Adventist who was, during the war, making bells with little pieces of leather. You could not find a whole piece of leather to make a belt in those days. The Germans picked that up, you know, for their army automatically. And while he was making those bells, he was teaching the prophecies to me. Daniel and the book of Revelation. Now keep in mind, I had at that particular point 5 years of Greek and Latin, classical training, very versed in antiquities, precisely because that was my training to get into either diplomatic corps or into specialized medicine, where most of the terms used were of Latin background and Greek background. So I was very intrigued. Tyre and Sidon. Well, I could tell him chapters about Tyre and Sidon, and that was in the Bible. And that succession, you know, of Daniel from the head to the foot. My, I was attracted. I felt at ease, you know. And when you feel at ease, you feel important. I did that for several weeks, maybe 2, 3, 4 months. And then I started attending Saturday afternoon meetings. I could not go Saturday morning. I had my classes in the Athenaeum, you know. But Louise had been telling me, look, Raoul, we were not in a loving relationship at that point yet. But I was attracted by the girl because she was extremely different from the other girls. And she was so clean, so pure, so clean. I mean, I'd never seen that in a girl, not even in my sister, you know. And she was telling me, look, Raoul, be very careful, because what you are learning is not that important. What you are learning from André, the Bible studies, it's not that important. I said, what? It shows that God has everything in his hands. Yes, that's true, she said, but look, Raoul, there's something much more important than that. There's Jesus Christ. And she had impressed me from the beginning by the way she talked about. You see, you need a personal relationship with Christ and a connection with the prophecies as much as you like to. But I'll tell you what, it's not the 2300 days of Revelation 14 who will help you to grow spiritually. So please, while you listen to the prophecies, and André is with us on Sabbath afternoon, he was the leader of the group of young people, remember Jesus Christ. And interestingly enough, I decided to study Jesus Christ in the Greek, because I was in my 5th year of Greek. There was no particular difficulty. She is responsible for putting in me. I did not realize that at the time. None at all. It took me approximately almost 13, 14, 15 years before being in Cologne and answering questions from my student who said, why is it that always you bring things back to Christ? And you see, so I started wondering, where did I get? And then it came back. It came back. That was Louise's style. Then, of course, I fell in love with the girl. But in those days, you waited until you had a job before you got married. So I courted her 5 years. 5 years. And then we got married in 1947. And I completely changed careers in the middle of the war. I was so shaken, so touched by the miseries brought by the war and the bombardments and the concentration camps, which we knew very well existed in spite of what the Germans say, you know. There was so much suffering, so much sacrifice. We didn't eat as we needed to, you know, and we all have suffered from that period. Who were youngsters. I tell you, I was 15 when the Germans invaded my country, and 20 when they left. So I have very strong and vivid memories of it. And so I was so affected by what I saw around me and the message that I had found now, you know, and that I decided I'll move into the ministry. My parents were very disappointed. My brother also, with whom I was very close. My teachers and the Athenaeum. But my father was a man who respected my opinions. And later on he was very happy that I became a professor of theology. So I went to the seminary in Collonges in 1945. Collonges-sous-Salève in southern France. But there, I knew so much of what they taught that I had already acquired, you know. I knew at least as much, if not more, Greek than my teacher, who held an MA in Greek, you know. And I mean, it was very embarrassing, very embarrassing to me. And so I stayed only 2 years. In 1947, I went out of there and entered the ministry in Belgium. But during my ministry, something happened to me. Of course, Louise was in Belgium, and I was in France, in Collonges, and we would marry once I would finish my studies when I would be hired. I had no difficulties being hired. There were 3 conferences who wanted my service, but I decided to go back to Belgium. But while I was in Collonges in my last year, my icon teacher, you know, a man in his 60s, Dr. Vaucher, who received an honorary degree from Andrews. I worked on that while I was chairman of the theology department. And Dr. Hamel was very much inclined to go along with me. He was the president at the time. Dr. Vaucher came to me, a brother Vaucher in those days. He came to me one day at the end of a class. He said, "Brother Dederen, I would like to see you a minute." So I saw him in a room for teachers. And he said, "Look, you are the brightest of our students. You know everything on your tests. You get all A's, you know. But you lack one very important thing. Very important." I said, "Well, could you tell me?" He said, "Yes. Let me ask you a question," he said. "Do you know what is in John 3:16? I said, "Yes, God so loved the world." So I go, "That's all right. Do you know what is in John 3:15? I said, "No." "How about John 3:17? "No." "You see what I mean?" he said. "You know the texts that you need to preach the gospel, but you don't know the gospel. You don't know them. Do you know the context of John 3? I said, "Yes, Nicodemus." Oh, that's amazing," he said. "Well, you need to learn to study the Bible. So would you come to my place? Every other Tuesday was a free day to go canvassing. Come to my study on Tuesday, and we'll spend a couple of hours together. Every other Tuesday." I said, "Okay." And he taught me personally. He was already my icon. He became, he was God incarnate for me, you know. And he explained to me how to study the Bible by characters, like Abraham, by chapters, by pericope, paragraphs, you know, by doctrines, from ethical perspective. And each time I had an exercise to make. I had no difficulties. He said, "You know English?" That I had learned from the GIs, you know, because schools were closed and we went out with the GIs. And one in particular became very close to me, and we walked thousands of miles over a 3-4 month period, the Battle of the Bulge. I was baptized in the middle of the Battle of the Bulge, among the booms of the guns, you know. And I learned the Bible that way. And Dr. Vaucher told me, now look, you know how to do it. Now, some exercises. Next week you do your study of the hand, the Bible's use of the word hand. Start with God. He said, you are fortunate because we don't have a concordance in French. We have one in German. I grew up in German and in French. My mother was of German background and my father was of Dutch background. I was Belgian before my father because I was born in Belgium. And he said, but you know English and we have a strong concordance. So you can find all the passages, study them, organize them, tell me what you learned. My, what a revelation. And then I moved to a character or to a teaching, you know, but seeking it in the scriptures, in the Greek, because that's what he wanted. He knew, he knew that I knew Greek. And so I learned the Bible, personally. And of course the gospel. And that brought me even closer to Jesus Christ. Now when I got into the ministry, after marrying Louise, I was so pleased that she married me. I had a lot of competition to face to get her because she was extremely pleasant. She was beautiful and very attractive. And she had become very attractive. She was not that attractive at the beginning. I expected a few other things, but no, that was not the case. And when we got married, we divided my mornings in 5 sections on the advice of Dr. Vaucher. After breakfast and taking my shower, no, we had no showers at the time because it was very rare after the war, but we bathed, you know. And breakfast at 7 o'clock in the morning. At 7, 8, 9, 10, 12. There were 1, 2, 3, 4 hours. First hour, read the Bible. Read the Bible. Read. Take a few notes if you want to. Read the Bible. From Genesis to Apocalypse, you know. Second hour, read about the Bible. And he had suggested two Bible dictionaries, one in 2 volumes and one in 5 volumes. And I tackled the 2-volume one. And I read it twice, from Aaron to Zerubbabel, you know. I learned a lot of things. The third hour, study the Bible. The fourth hour, work on your sermon and your public evangelism on the basis of what you are doing. And you know, when you do that, and you have the tools to do it, and the training to do it, there are so many among us who are mediocre in the ministry. It's too bad. They are just satisfied with what they learn in the seminary. They are too busy. Not busy enough to play with their tablets. I don't use a tablet. I don't even have a cell phone here. You know, my secretaries did that. That was very convenient. Yeah. But I never learned to do it. I had been 2 years young evangelist with the pastor who baptized me, but who never gave me a Bible study. And after 2 years in Brussels, a crisis occurred in the second largest church, French-speaking church in Belgium, in Liège, which was not very large, but about 80, 90 members. But it was the second largest one. The war had been ravaging, you know, the members. It was very difficult to be a Seventh-day Adventist during the war because we were considered Jews. My in-laws were almost in a concentration camp if it hadn't been for a smart remark of my mother-in-law, because they had a shop and they closed on Friday night. And everybody knew it in the village, you know. But I spent 7 years in the pastoral ministry. After 2 years in Brussels, the crisis occurred in Liège. The pastor had committed adultery with one of the girls of the church. There were 2 elders, one on each side, one for the pastor and one against what the pastor had done. And it was a tragedy. There was blood, cries. So Raoul, please go to Liège, hold the fort until we find a man with a beard. Those were the very words, which meant a man of experience. And Raoul was 24. He was 22 when he started, and he was 24 at that time. And Raoul stayed 5 years in that church. I was able to bring them back together. Jesus Christ. Very few doctrines. And certainly, except when I did evangelism, why did they come, the church members? Because they wanted to hear that, you know. And we were able to bring those 2 churches together, those 2 groups in the church. After 5 years, comes the division president to my place with the union president. And they tell me, Brother Dederen, we want you to go to the seminary. That was in 1954. We want you to go to the seminary at Cologne and teach. I said, I? At 29? Go to Cologne and teach? No. Why? You know, it's an honor. Well, no, you see it as an honor. I don't think it's the way of God. How can you say that? Well, doesn't the gospel say that you recognize a tree at its fruit? You just told me, the union president, that my church has been the fastest growing in the whole union and the most generous per capita to sustain the work in the whole union. And you want me elsewhere? Put me in another church and let's try to do the same thing. Oh, that. Well, they argued with me and I just was not ready. And so they left. 3 weeks later comes my icon, Vaucher. I guessed what he was coming for. And so he says, Brother Dederen, you have no right to say no. You do not belong, you belong to the church. I said, no, I don't belong to the church. I have always told that to my students. I do not belong to the Adventist Church. I belong to Jesus Christ. And I serve him in the Adventist Church because it is the closest to the truth. And I'm glad to be there, you know. No, I mean, he said, look, Dr. Dederen, you and I have many things in common. I also was young when I was called to be a teacher. But you see, when there are others who cannot do the job, they go for the better one. The one that can help out. You see the needs of the field. You see the needs of your area. You love your members. You see the needs of Belgium or of the Union. They see the needs of the whole division. Could you please understand that there are other fields that need what you know? And would you please go? And I still remember walking with Louise, you know, because I wanted Louise to be with me. And finally we acceded. We said, okay, we'll go. And I found myself at 29 among all those pontiffs, you know. After 2 years, I became chairman of the department, like here at Andrews. After 2 years, I became chairman of the theology department also. But they accepted me. The student, I mean, had no problem with the student. Worked so well, you know. But I told them, look, on one condition, I'll go to Cologne. One. No condition. I said, okay, then let's forget about it. See, I had the aces in hand. I said, okay. They said, what is the condition? Oh, you like it, I said. If I succeed in Cologne, let's give it 2 years. I don't know how it'll work. 2 years. If after 2 years you think I should stay, then I want to work on a doctorate. Because if I need to teach, I need a title that will benefit you as an institution and that will give some prestige to the classes we teach and attract the students. Oh, yeah, but that is okay, let's do it on that basis. After 6 months, 1 year, there was as much fruit on one side as in public evangelism, which I have always loved, you know. And they said, could you please stay now? After 1 year, not 2. I said, on one condition, that I prepare. And Geneva was 10, 12 miles from our place, as I mentioned earlier. But they said, we don't believe in eggheads. What? The division president? Brother Friedland, I can't believe. But he was a missionary for 25 years in the Cameroons. You know, I have been to the Cameroons a couple of 3 times with former students who were head of our school. There are former students of mine who was head of the school there, Richard Lehmann in particular. And all we need is the Spirit, the Holy Spirit. I said, but what does Ellen White say about it? Do you remember? He said, don't bring Ellen White up because you win the game. He believed in Ellen White. He did, oh yes. I said, so, okay, huh? No, he said, we don't have the money. Okay, you don't have the money, we'll do it on our own. My father-in-law was willing to help out, was quite proud. I told you that a shop, you know, and had several buildings. And Louise was very enthusiastic. She always had said, I had studied Hebrew when I was in the ministry in Belgium, classes in Hebrew which I had never learned in the Athenaeum. And Louise had always encouraged me to go on, you know, you have the basics, go on. I mean, you will never be satisfied if you can't reach the goal. And so they gave me the summers free, didn't lighten my burden. In fact, I became the following year the chairman of the department. And I worked on my doctorate. And in 1963, I received my doctorate from the University of Geneva. It's a very interesting situation because you could not get into the theology department if you did not belong to a church that was part of the World Council of Churches. But we had in a belles lettres, in letters, if you like it, you know, we had a program for those people like myself, who was very similar to some extent at least to what was going in theology, especially for those who knew Latin and Greek, which was my case. So I got a very strong degree in historical theology. It was not called historical theology because there was not a theology department. It was fine arts. It was called moral sciences. The subterfuge of the universities, you know, moral sciences. And okay, in 63 I got it with a request. I had been assistant to one of the teachers and they wanted me to continue there. I said, no. Jesus Christ. I want to teach Jesus Christ. And the following year, in 64, the secretary of the department of the division rushes up in my apartment where my wife was. She told me the story. I was in class. And she told her, Louise, what did you do to go to Washington now? To go to the States? What? Yes, what did you go? Did you write? Did you ask people to hire you? Are you saying that we are going to answer my question? He said. Louise couldn't believe what was happening. She said, we never wrote. It's true. There had been extension schools. And I had always been the main translator, because of my familiarity with English, which we had studies clandestinely under the Germans. We were not allowed to study English, but we had night meetings 3 times a week to learn English with one of our professors, you know. And then I had practiced with the GIs who had stayed 3-4 months in our area, the Battle of the Bulge, you know. So I knew a little more than the others. And, well, I helped in extension schools, Dr. Murdoch, Dr. Loseby, Dr. Anderson, you know, those saints of the early days. And it was a custom to reward a teacher to go 3 months as a student. But I was going as a teacher. So the president of the school, Dr. Zircher, comes to me and tells me, "Do you know that you are going to Andrews University as a teacher?" "No, I just learned it from my wife." "There must be a mistake," he said. "There must be a mistake. Maybe you go like I did, you know, a semester or 2 there to be acquainted with the culture." I said, "I don't know." But then the secretary of the department reaches me and asks me the series of questions and returns to Bern, to the headquarters of our division, convinced that indeed we had not been trying to leave. But Dr. Zircher, the president of the seminary at Cologne, said, "I need to look into that quite clearly." He was not too happy. He had hoped that his brother-in-law, who held a master's degree, would be called to the States and get training here and stay there. I know there are families like that everywhere, you know. He had to leave the seminary because of what I had been reacting to him as a student about the Greek and the person of Christ and the substitutionary death of Jesus Christ on the cross that he did not believe in. And they did not ask him to leave the seminary while I was there. They were very wise, the brethren. They waited 1 year and asked him to spend a little more time in the field, you know. But everybody knew that Dederen and Gilson and Delard and Arnott had been behind Georges Steveny leaving the seminary. So he wasn't sure that I should go. But he came back to me 4 days later. The president had gone to Bern, and he told me, "You will receive a letter from the General Conference. You are going." And I cannot oppose it, he said. It is in such terms, with a particular kind of visa, that I cannot oppose it. And so I came to the States in '64. The first thing we did was to cross the state in Greyhound bus, go to the East Coast, where that GI friend of mine had become a physician, and took us on a long trip from up Oregon to down San Diego for 4 weeks, you know, showing us the country. Then we came back to Andrews and started teaching. When I came in here in '64, it was a very strange culture. My wife made an enormous sacrifice, giving up her family, but she was very attached to me. We have been always extremely attached to each other. We have been married 68 years, plus 5 years that I courted her. That's almost 3/4 of a century, you know. She passed away last month, or in December. She suffered from a particular type of Alzheimer. It was dementia. It was a very painful thing. I stayed with her to the very, very end. She did not spend more than 3 weeks away from home. I stayed with her all the time, even when she was in the hospital and in the hospice at the end. She had encouraged me to come to the States. She said, "Raoul, look, now you got your doctorate. We could stay here. If you want to stay here, I'll back you up." In fact, she says, I would like to stay here. I had been 17 years in the Euro-Africa division, you know. I knew French, German, some English, and enough Spanish and Italian to order food and stay out of trouble. You know, and I related very well to the students coming from all those parts, you know, and I was very happy. But Vaucher, he came back again. You need to go to the States, Raoul. The first person I met was the department chair. There were only 13 teachers at the time. Now there are over 40. 13 at the time. Dr. Heppenstall. When he sees me, he tells me, "You are Dr. Dederen." "I want you to know that I did not lift even a finger to get you here," he said. That was quite a welcome. I said, "There must be a reason for that." Yes, I brought in just a few weeks ago another man for the department, Dr. Ted Vick, who was teaching in our school, in our seminary in Canada. He is too bright for them, too bright. The students cannot get along with what he says, they don't understand him, but he needs the seminary kind of situation. Oh, that's very good, I'm very glad to meet Dr. Vick. Yeah. But Dr. Murdoch called me in. And of course I knew Dr. Murdoch for having translated him twice in extension schools, which lasted usually 4 weeks. And he sits, the old Scot saint, tall, like, even taller than you, sitting in behind his desk. "Dr. Dederen, it is a pleasure, let me tell you, to be here. But I must say that I'm not the one who initiated your coming. It is President Hamel." Now Hamel, Richard Hamel, is the real university administrator that I have ever seen at work. He knew what a university was. It was at the very beginning. He had the money from the GC. He could hire people in. And in agreement with Dr. Murdoch, he had decided to call me in. And that because before he became president 1 year earlier than my coming here, he was associate secretary in the education department of the General Conference, in charge of the French-speaking fields, because he had served in Indochina, which was French-speaking, the current Vietnam, you know, and Laos. And so he had met me in class, and I had seen that strange GC fellow, you know, who came there to inspect our schools. And he was sitting in my classes a few times. Then I met his son. And when I came to the States, Dr. Hamel told me, "You know, you allow me to call you Raoul?" He said, "Oh yes, of course," I said, "but I can't call you Dick." "All right," he said, "I understand. No, and I think it's better that way, because you are the youngest faculty in the seminary." All right. So he said, "I heard so much from American students taking advanced classes in French, in your classes in Cologne, that when I went, I checked, and I heard my son, I said, we want him at Andrews." And that's how you got it. I hope you will stay. But I was there for 1 or 2 years, a trial test, because maybe I would not be able to adjust, or I wouldn't like it. But it's developed so very strangely, you know. Dr. Murdoch called me in, as I said. I opened a parenthesis there. And we are sitting together, "So you will be studying?" I said, "Yes, when I come back from California, where I went on that trip, you know, I will be glad to come." He said, "What do you want to teach?" I looked at him, said, "What are you saying?" "Well, I have some classes that I think you could teach, but what would you like to teach?" "May I be sincere?" "Yes, provided you can justify it," he said. "Oh, of course," I said. "I wouldn't venture in any other way." I told him, "Dr. Murdoch, there is a strong, strong development in Western Europe. And you," I said, I didn't say we yet at the time, "you Americans, Adventist Americans, are sending the best of your crop to get degrees in our universities in Europe. And I know what they teach. I know Karl Barth, I know Bultmann, I know Emil Brunner. I mean, they are studying under these men. And they will come back. And I can tell you what the problem will be. And you have it in a few years. In less than 2 or 3 years you will have it. It's epistemology, the authority of the scriptures. Can the scriptures be taken seriously? He said, you are right, he said. I didn't realize it was that widespread. But that's what I read in my periodicals, he said. Okay, so what will you teach? I said, I suggest a course in revelation and inspiration. I call it revelation-inspiration. So that's a very good idea, he said. All right, we teach, he said, we teach revelation as part of another course on the doctrine of God. But we can take it out of there and make room for you. What else would you like to teach, he said. Oh, I said, you want more? I said, well, if you ask me, I would like to teach the doctrine of Christ. That's what I teach, he said. Oh, but I don't want to take your place, Dean. But I don't want to teach anymore. I'm getting too old. And I'd be very happy to give you the course. I have heard about your doctrine of Christ in Cologne. So why don't you? Okay. I couldn't believe it, you know. And then he said, do you have a third one? I said, yes. Now you are a systematic theologian, I said. And you know what goes together with epistemology, revelation, Christology. You know the next step, do you? He said, doctrine of the church. I said, yes. We need to teach those three. But we don't have a course on doctrine of the church. Do you think it's worth it? And so he explained to me, he told me, show me why you think it is important. I told him, look, Dean, in just a few years, coming from the West, we will be facing a crisis in epistemology, and I can tell you where it will hit. It will not only hit the Bible, but Ellen White, because they will easily move from the Bible, the authority, the value of the words of the prophet. How can they know that? And counter theology, you see, counter theology. And then they'll go to Ellen White. And you know where the weakness is. Huh? He said, yes, I know. He said, they will accuse her of borrowing. What is your understanding about that, he said. Well, I tell you, in my opinion, a prophet is not called to be original in what he or she says. A prophet lives in a certain context, surrounded by ideas and thoughts, and he is charged by God under the guidance of the Holy Spirit to select from the mass of ideas that circulate those that should be retained and be part of the training of his people. That's the role of the prophet, not to be original. Paul was not original. We can almost say that there is almost no single idea of Jesus that was brand new with Jesus. Those, what he was talking about things that were received, but he had his emphasis on them. And the same thing about Isaiah. He said, don't tell me, he said, my doctoral dissertation was on Jeremiah. And it is exactly true, he said. Also, he said, I feel at ease. And that's how I got to teach those three doctrines. And from the very start, no, at the beginning, I didn't get into ecclesiology. I taught the doctrine of man. Bob Wieland was one of my students, the first class in Christology. And another dissident who had his headquarters in Arkansas, Watchman What of the Night was his periodical, was also sitting in my class. in Christology. It was very interesting. They did not share my views, but we had very vivid conversation. And my style was very particular. Maybe you have heard about it. I never allow students to stop when I teach. I teach, and every third or fourth class period is entirely devoted to question and answers. You need to reflect on what I say. Let me finish what I'm trying to get across to you. Follow me, and if you see problems, then go ahead, we shall have a session of question and answers. And that's how I taught. Besides, I moved a lot within the class. And that terrorized the students at times. I stopped at their desk and asked them specific questions, I had a great time teaching. I was offered to become the dean of the seminary 12 years after I came here in 76. No. I mean, an administrator, I respect them, but my task was to preach Jesus Christ, train pastors, and now I was involved, and I had worked hard with Dr. Hamel and half a dozen of others to work on the doctoral program, And then I became dean of the seminary 2 years before I retired, when there was a real crisis with the Dr. Hazel thing, And the faculty was so divided at the time. But in progress, it was not the issue of the ordination of women to ministry at the time. It was historical criticism in some form, and solid Adventism. I became a dean in order to help out. And those were the last couple of years, but I left my teaching. And I traveled around a lot. In those days, I was the most traveled ones. I was twice invited to the GC. Elder Pearson, when he became president, came to see me here at the time of a meeting of the Board of Trustees. He told me, Raoul Dederen, I know you through African ministers who were students of yours, where I served in that field. I couldn't believe it, And then he said, look, I want you to come to Andrews. We'll create a Biblical Research Institute. You will be the chairman of it, and you'll be field secretary. Have you seen Dr. Hamel, I asked? Yes. He cannot object to it. I'm the president. I said, I want to think about it. How long are you here? He said, 3 days. And the next day I went to him and said, Elder, I'm sorry to disappoint you, but I cannot. I hope we'll remain friends. And we became very good friends. Time after time I found whole paragraphs of what I wrote to him in answer to his questions, in decisions taken by vote in GC assemblies. It was very amusing. And then a second time I was called to go to the GC, but my wife was called to go into the archives there. And she asked the question from Arthur White now, but what will we do with Raoul? Well, he said, we'll find a job for him, don't worry. We'll find it. But she said, no. I know Raoul is not enthusiastic, and that time, that was another Pharaoh, was no longer Elder Pearson, but they took it nicely too. I had been so often to Washington, D.C. I knew how things went, and I just felt not at ease. I thought, maybe, I don't think it's pride. I'm aware of what my calling is. I know my shortcomings. And I know where I can help. For instance, I have never been enthusiastic about writing a book, but writing articles, there you get me. I'm much more interested in training students, and especially doctoral students. Because this, you see, our people do not read. Look at the publishing houses we have, how they close their doors. And the books written by my predecessors, you know, where are they? You know, and I have always considered that by training doctoral students, training them well, you know, going back to their field, I accepted international students only on one condition. There was a commitment to go back to their field. They could not stay in the state, except if there were special circumstances in agreement with their division, that division and the General Conference. That was another story. You see, this was my style, training students and doctoral students in particular, and I enjoyed it. When I think about what happened during all those years, since my contact with these two young girls and the sled experience, I can only bless God and thank Him. My father asked me twice if I wasn't sorry for having chosen the career that I had, but he knew that I was too happy. He came to see me and he was impressed. He loved it also. And I thank God for the training that I got when I was young, that was arduous, strict in schooling, that prepared me unconsciously, you know, prepared me for the task of ministry, where the Lord called me and I had a chance to serve Him in various capacities as a teacher, a professor of theology.